인다
나서
라서
So I would like to introduce Khenpo Ngawang Tsultrim to all of you, and he's going to talk to us about translation as it was done in Tibet with Panditas and Lotsawas. 나서 Khenpo
오야 당고 조는 됐어.
드세르라.
오야. 네. 담미서기 뭐도 제고 말어.
나서
뭐도 제고를 왜 간다.
땡고트 시사인
미슈타이.
오야야. 대표야 버렸어. 야야.
털어 참을 피대
오야 미 가세요래.
Mi initial hardware were about more than 20%. Ngansogi kala warta chi kijurgi sabjonte ke nalol yode initial hardware tene dela matsube ge antrom mi chilon mi tes mongoler.
오 라스. 야야 네. 토마텔라 로질 호자 추지 잠소기다 로마 용라 아니 참투타지 델레스 쉐이
So to start with, I would like to address my Trisdilit. Welcome all the students of Dharmasagar.
디니 다트링하게 디니 로자와든 데비기다 계제 카시지 쉬야레 다데 담시게 나바다고 지메 가이스나 당알아 담시 시야기 가서다 jon탄다 연데 근데 체크한 요는 말에 근데 얘는 당이 조금 마완트네 코랑게다 뭔다고 제마도가 제지 근데 만조 다 로자와 가당 제비기 아니 레지티게 톨라다 파자 칼라부다 돌레인도 지도와 아니 나이나 다다파다 보긴 난추레 되네 제네레 믹서기타 로지기 톨라다 칠리치디 요레 아니 디나니 다다다 로자와른 진상보기 아니 메시그 로지 톨라 심조치네 PhD 도슨조디기 요레 아니 드리치온디치 따자 통자자고 다냠뇽자고 테스 요바티 아니 지난발에 테스지 펜토나 삼니콜롱티 쿠지 아니 나서 받았다 갈라고 그 양보 당 로로지네다 돌렌치야인다 니강 시바데 지난발에 파피 아니 지난발 양지 좋아다 아니 도바다 남도 된다 요나 양수 좋아나나 양지그리 나서 파스 로로지니 돌렌가 나바서 제인 스테디 슈르치
So what I want to share with you is to share my thoughts about the work of translators of Lotsawas, and to tell some things that are related to the work of translators. And so first of all, I don't want this address of mine to be taken as a speech. I do not have neither the qualities nor the abilities to actually deliver a speech. But I find myself here because my friend Ngawang has asked me to do so, so I felt I could not refuse to him. And so I think that we should simply have a conversation about the work of translators and the work of Lotsawas. And so as for myself, I have some experience of working around Tibetan Buddhism in general, and specifically about history of Tibetan Buddhism. And so that is my background. And on top of that, right now, I'm currently working on my PhD that is about Lotsawas and translation in the context of the school Rinchen Zambo. And so I just want to share my thoughts about this subject with you. I just want it to be some very informal, very open formats where we can, whenever you have any question, you feel free to come up and ask something that I'm going to answer right away. And I just want to share what I saw, what I found until now in my research and in my experience. And so I would like it to be a real exchange, not a speech, but a real exchange where we can talk to each other, have a real conversation. And I want it to be completely relaxed also.
Tine ngi keda shebi ki nang la yang chi nga ki ma shi pa ta yang chi shetan narwa yang chi na koda man ro ba la so ba da tanda yong si ba de ane tenda chungwa yin na ane chen so la ni gong da xue yin.
And in what I'm going to say, it is possible that there are things that I'm not aware of, that I understood incorrectly, and so, or simply that I did not understand at all. And so if this kind of things occur, then I'm right now I'm excusing myself to you.
Tine tatare nga so Lotsawas tam devi ki kolla ta donen chi indi ane thomar tela ta Lotsawa la ya ki ta thani sana mendo ane dashi tini ngo tsumi ke de siena tes ta bi boda wachi chasa res tine ta phogi ke nangla ane Lotsawa sia ji ki ta minji yoderwa Tati Thoma Kin Jungkong Raote Ane Jargita Sanskrit Tangaso Liger La Bigrava Bokela or Liger Ganani Chong Watana Chiresha Sta Liger Ganangla Ane Kara Lagutu Sena Loka Chus Lagudos Loka Chu Ta Loka Chu De Bokela so tonjur chin jor yuma ina ani local layati sanskrit na local layati jikten layata ani sauchu layati mik layata na so mik layati yorwa ta teni dom ni tonjur chewa ina ani jikten chin mik layati o tande chi chagdo sra tene ta tege sanskrit nangla ta jikting ge mik laya mar loga cha chula ya ta tonjur chinan jikting ge mik laya te ta pacher ta sanskrit nangni ta Lotsawas tenso la main tanda chi thomar jangkhin ge dajar Khenpo ji yorwa o tenso ke ani Lotsawas tenso la cheto cheji ani cheto ke Khenpo Java tanda ji sares.
Chimto, goma san.
Cheto. Ya.
Cheto, nasamas.
Cheto.
So we're going to talk about Lotsawas, and since we are going to talk about this theme, then the start of our conversation can be the word Lotsawa itself. And so Lotsawa is a word that is found in Tibetan language, and trying to find where it came from, then the origin of the word Lotsawa itself, it actually came from India. It's coming from Sanskrit language, and if we try to look at what the original meaning of this word that comes from Sanskrit, then we find the Sanskrit word loka Takshu, and translating literally the two words which compose this expression Loka Chakshu, then we have first Loka, which means the world, and Takshu, which means eyes, the eyes that we have. And so together the meaning of Loka Takshu is the eyes of the world. And as for the first moment, the first occasion when translators have been referred to by Loka Takshu or by the eyes of the world, then it seems that it was used by Indians, and so by Sanskrit-speaking persons who wanted to kind of pay homage or to bring the high qualities of translators.
Yeah. Dene da Sanskrit nangiti logat chu laya ti da bogil sujong ni kapsu anen jikti ki make laya chi chag yorwa. Dene yena yang ta nga su bogi ki nang la cho dewa ti anen Lotsawas la da Lotsawas. Tema do jikti ki make laya ti da yongra ki pechon nangi yomare. Yemba yena yang tsam la ta boga Lotsawa Khenpo pena bero tsana tang tene kaju xiangsum tene cheper de Lotsawa rinchen zangbo tang ane ngo Lotsawa lodin shirap o tenso la ta pena nyanga ge langni toba tanda jiyong di kapsu ane jikten major lochin rinchen zang siya gzo dawa tang ane jikten meki ngo lo chenpi shab siya gzo dawa ngo Lotsawa lodin shirap la ngo lo la digra ngo lo Khenpo o ta te ta wi goni ya chito jeje ane sen tanda ji boso tanda ya to yena ya ta tsawi chani na ta yongra ge pejo tang dia te Lotsawas ta Lotsawa la ya te khande chag yore sana dase te Sanskrit da ane poke ki ta meni sene ta jawa tanda ji pena Lotsa laya te loga datsa chu ge duni Lotsa laya ki main triba che ani Lotsa wa laya ke wa te ani poge ke nani ta dada pena ijor the kebjo ke lega ching ke mitela Lotsawas nanje nga so tang Khenpo la dia te tang ani pena romon khen sia go do tang tene ijor wa sia go do chi ta dada ji jam yorwa o tuni chi ta Lotsawa la ya do dini shena poge ke nang la Lotsawa la dia te ani Sanskrit tang ani poge ni se ni ani jo debo tab debo tanda chi ya ke che ta ta ja tanda chi re sming de.
And so, in Sanskrit, the word that has been used, or the expression that has been used in order to refer to translators, has been lokatsakshu, or the eyes of the words that we have seen. And yet, when it comes to Tibetan, the word that is actually used is lotsawa, not lokatsakshu. And it is very rare, or it has not become the common usage to refer to translators by saying that they are the eyes of the world, literally, jikten gimi. And yet, when it comes to the greatest translators, or when we want to show deference towards them, just like when it comes to Berotsana or Gacho Shansum, the three great translators, or Rinchen Zambo or Ngo Loden Sherab, then we find some passages or some verses that show their greatness and that use this expression, just like Rinchen Zambo, who is the eye of the world, or the great Ngo Lotsawa, who has become the eye of the world. And so this expression has been embedded or is used as a way to refer out to the translators with great respect, showing their qualities. And yet the commonly used word that has been taken in order to refer to translators is Lotsawa. And so, coming to the word Lotsawa itself, it is a word that shows a mixture between Tibetan language and Sanskrit language. We find Lotsa, which is a direct borrowing from Loka Tsakshu. So the Lo and Tsa come from actually Loka Tsakshu. And then, so this is the Sanskrit part of Lotsawa, and then the Wa is actually a Tibetan particle that expresses the person who does something, the agent of something. We can find the use of something similar, for example, of an agent in Khenpo. Khenpo is the scholar, the one who knows, the one who is scholar. Or you also have Romo Ken, where the Ken is also the agent, the particle of the agent, which means the musician. So not the music, but musician, the one who does the music. And we also have that in Yigurwa, which means translator. So it's not a translation, but translator. And so, in short, Lotsawa is a word that borrows both from Tibetan and Sanskrit. And it has been put together by Tibetans because it's much easier and much more natural for them to use Lotsawa rather than to use the full expression Lokatakshu.
다 Sanskrit nangla Lokatakshu 다 보게 nangla tene jikti means 다 tin 다 rangi thoni 다 Lotsawa layati 다 Lotsawa layake leni amlikati yana Lotsawa mi khorang andinoni zo tanga so ti Lotsa ke legati le janalisar Lotsa ke legati ani 다 감 상게 다 개침부 연바 감 상게 짜 침부 연바 되게 다 메인 되게 흉ning 가서 하고 두고도스 다 빼차자와이나 당가서 밀 차 총바이나 밀라 왕보 나요가데 다 왕보 나게 낭니 아니 초도 주비가 왕보디 가르차요르스나 매고 왕보디 차요라 메디 차요라 다 메디 메와이나 다티 미디 기 단지딘데 카도 찍자고 저래 다 카도 페나 문화긴 찍게 마도 다 카도 나보 마도 아니 리도 넘버 2 카도 나 소바티 요 말아 오 때가 난진 다 페나 찍딘데 로사와나 마정와이나 아니 찍딘 태양 페나 카도 찍자고 치 답배 찾아와이나 पेना मेरी की काम याना लोंबा ची जाकब चीला लोसावा लाया थी माजों बयना अने मेरी ते ना लोंबा ते ना अने जाकब ते तापेना खादुक चिक दोला ना काडसिना पेना मेरी ते दा लोंबा ते खोरंग सो अने रंगसा रंगयोनी यार दार देवा की रिने ते मातो अने का मेरी जेंदा लोंबा जेंदा जाकब जेनी च तार देवा की ता रिने नाबा ना सोबा ओ तंदची यों थुयो मारवा ओ जेजां ता ते ताबु के नाबा जी की थोनी अने जितिंग के मेक लाइक मेन ते सेंदे सोया ता अने ते दा न्याम दे ते की शुगला अने लोचावा लाया ते ता कंदला वता काम सम केचिमु यंबा लोचा के लेगा ती लेरिक ते अने काम सम केचिमु यंबा तेंगा हाको थुयो रेस
And so we have this expression in Sanskrit, Lokatakshu, and in Tibetan we have the eye of the world, or Jiktengimik. And so just looking at this title or the expression that is used to refer to translators, we can understand how translators themselves, or let us rather say the work of a translator, how much important, how much precious the work of a translator is for the people who benefit from his work. And so this is something that can be inferred by looking at the expression itself. And so this is understood because the reason why we are talking about eye here, so usually humans have these 5 senses, out of which the supreme one, or the best, the one that has that is the highest, is usually said to be the eye. And the reason is that if we don't have the sight, if our organ of the eye is not working properly, then it would be like our whole world is reduced to only one color. We wouldn't have these beautiful things, not beautiful things, and all the diversity of the colors that we can see and to see all the objects. But without the sight, then we have only one color, which is the color of darkness. Besides that, we don't see anything. So it is the reason why we're talking about eyes in the description or in the word that is referring to translators. And so similar to that, if a culture or if if a culture or a country does not have any translators, then to that country or to that culture, then there is only one color. And the only one color here would be the one culture that is known by this and the people of that culture or of that country. But besides that, there's no other color, no other culture that can be known. And so because of it, then they are all limited to this one color. And so all the other cultures and ideas and all the richness, wealth of other qualities that come from other cultures and countries is left unknown, not perceived, because they don't have any translators. And so it is for that reason that the translators are called the eyes of the world. And so, by understanding the expression itself that later became Lotsawa and the meaning that it conveys, we can understand how important the work of translators are actually.
사전. 근데 니바디 가르스나다 페나 미그리엔한다 아니 메리키엔한다 야나 롱바치엔한다 자카피엔한다 다 창마기 로바티다 디지당 테네치 야지 다 야지 라야테라 tana tsumbu ge yaji dang tana nang samlo ge yaji ta yaji tanda yung doba logo yor wan doya da ta tendi chiyo de kaps ta te ta wi ge yaji chi yung gona ta te yaji yung ala karti karchi go yor se na tana yaji yung a ge ju te ta ngobi ge jene ta pa pena chenri tang tana pena songli ge rig bala so ba tap sumi bi ge jene sumi bu phijin do ya ge jene ngi bi jene tang ane samlo de mi ge samlo tang ane namjo shirap ane mi ge kumjo de so yaji yong na tene nang samlo ge jene ta pena chuluk andamela yorwa ta pena yeshu ge chuluk tang tene Muslim ki chulok dang tene Hindu ki chulok dang tene namba sanje ba ki chulok la so ba chulok mango yorwa o tenzo ki samno kene ni tezo le tende ki yores ta te ta bi ki rinne tsenge pi rinne yenare nang samne rinne yenare tone rinne te ta posan soba chi yunya ta posan soba chi cha gona ane te ta tsangma loza wala tengo yore ta te ma do shin ta pena longba chi la ta pena mixer gi chi Lotsawa mewa chi ani tsulo ge rene de so nangven che ma to pe na ani longba te rang ge ta pena saji do chi ge rene da ma to rene na ba na so ba da yong ma ta ba ni gong de shiro wa o ta nang ji ani rene na so na den che tu yo ma re la ani te la te ne ani kala go ta sumi pi ya ji na ya shida do tu yo ma re la ani nang sam lo ge ya ji na ya shida yong tu yo ma re ta te na te li chang tene kache wa chi la ta pe na chulo te so ke na ne ta sanji chulo yang da wo te la cha song ba yin na tene sanji chulo ran khorang ki thone re na re tene te ma yin ba yang chi ta do ki thona yin na re ane sanji chulo ke na ne yang pe na senkang rik ba la so ba there ko ne yin na re ha sa ya ke teng sa bo tene ji yo de re tan de ta wen de yang tene pe na ta ta cha ja wa yin na ta pe na Ari tang Canada la soba ta nilsu gu chi so tang tene foreign la soba ta Europe gu chi so tenso gu nang la pa chi ta nang den chi tar go wa yena ane Lotsawa ane seda den ba tan chi mena ane tar ma ta ya yang ta wa chi tar ma ta ya o tan chi cha on di kap su ane Lotsawa la ya de ta pim si bi ta ka chenbo tan cha gu dos tene cha wi cha ni da chinso nang la kashi Lotsawa chi jimba tanda yujire tene 망부지 다 로자게 다 로다티나나 서치와 단자 인사데 근데 강타야 다 지란 속에 다 로자와게 리릭데 아니 감삼 개침부 연바 다티게 위바다 진진 시비게 토니 아니 리릭데 쇼유제레 트레닝이 다 로자와티 개침부 인비 콜 담sam마도 다 트렌 슈그멘스
And so the second thing is that whether we are talking about individually or at the scale of a country or at the scale of a people or at the scale of a region, what people want is everything that is good, the happiness, and we want progress. And this progress can take the form of material progress, so progress in terms of the material things, or it can also be progress in terms of the ideas and the thoughts. But whatever the case, everyone wants that things get better, that there is progress. And in order for progress to happen, and then if it is if it is in the case of material progress, then we need to rely on the knowledge that science brings, and that science that has been developed by people outside our own culture or country, etc., to come to us and then to improve what we already know. And of course, when it comes to the progress of the ideas, of the thoughts, and then we are talking about what will improve the behavior or the conduct of people, and this has to do with the religions or spiritual traditions. And so, of course, we have many different religions like Christianity, we have Islam, we have Hinduism, we have Buddhism as well. And so all of these are part of the progress of the ideas that people want to have and would like to have. And so whether we are talking about improving the culture from the outside, from material things, or from the inside, from the ideas that these cultures convey, in order for this culture to be fully developed in a place where that is not its initial culture, then it relies entirely on the quality of the translators and the quality of the translation that are done into the receiving culture. And because of that, if in one country there is no qualified translators, then all the knowledge and all the culture, all the science from other countries and cultures cannot reach this culture, and that does not have them yet, and they cannot be also used and and they cannot be also they cannot be taught and developed correctly if the translators do not do a good job. And so now going to religions, and particularly the religion that was taught by the Buddha, so about Buddhism, whether we want that Buddhism gets implanted and that people benefit from it from the side of it being a religion, or whether we're interested into the philosophy that it brings about. And then we also have, of course, all the sciences related to the mind that are extremely developed in a very profound way in Buddhist cultures and thoughts. And so all of this, if we want to be able to bring it to our respective cultures and then to make it thrive and to develop and make people benefit from it, then it is just like, there are all these centers around the world, like from the US, Canada, and then in Europe, in different countries. If we want that the centers in those countries benefit from the culture and from the religion that Buddhism has to offer, then there is no really other way around than having the texts and the books that convey these ideas to be well translated into the language of the people who live there. And otherwise, then it's very difficult for Buddhism to take root properly, and either as a philosophy or as a religion or as anything else. And so this shows how important it is to actually translate. So the work of a translator is really important from that standpoint. And so some of you here must already be translators. Some of you must get involved for the first time or start to want to become translator right now. But whatever the case, I'm sure that all of you came here knowing the reason and knowing what the use of being a translator would be, and how important the task of a translator is. So I don't need to go further in putting forward the reasons and the importance of being a translator.
Tene dangaso chuji janso kita Lotsawas ke lobja di ta so miyoti ta Lotsawas ke nang ne ane sanji chulo ki ta Lotsawas ke lobja chi chagyo re ne sanji chulo la yang ta mangbo ji yo de yo re tena 보지 산지 출로 그네 자나기 산지 출로 그네 스리랑카 담 버마다 캄보디아라 소바다 텐소게 나나야 아니 산지 출로 다데와 요레 다 옌바예나에 텐소게 나니 당아소 추지 잠소게 로드라기 다 로타 진에 당야티 보지 산지 출로게 담지 요레 ताते ngārāṅ kīsāṅ tāṅvāyī na tāte pē mīsī pī yāpo rēs tāte dāmbā tī mānor wā rēs jāchā jā thāmbā tī mānor wā rēs gārī chēnī sī shūvāyī na tā tātā pārdū nzambulīṅ kī tōlā nī lōṅbā mandā wā kī sāñjī chūlō tā kāṅdū shūvā na jī māṅbō yō rē tē āni tēnsō thāmshī kī nāṅ nī tā chīn chūtū chūrbā tē 저는 보지 산이 출로되레스 다댕아기 신고진이 주네 가르치는 시와이나 다 보기 산지 출로게 낭라 아니 요즈이게 토니 데모 송가 차상와 요바 강시라 아니 요즈게 토니 아니 티파 솜당 아니 동하니 도나 그 산지 출로에다 일런 리섬 그 남자 차 상황이 타다단 좀블링 돌 요대와테 아니 고개 게임은 요대와테 징거래 테마도야 옌바 페나 롱바 옌바라 타르데와 텐동이 산지 출로 텐동 야타바 마레스 슈네 얘는 차 상황 요대와테 아니 타다 고개 게임은 요대와테 아니 보지 산지 출로데스 네 들으는데 대신이 the Damba de Manover is serious.
Yes. And so here we are in the context of this translation, the school that is called Dharmasagar Translation Project. And so those who are here have chosen to become translators for Buddhism. So it's not any type of translation that we are studying, but we are studying translation specifically on Buddhist texts. And so it is a project that aims at training translators for Buddhist texts. And out of the different Buddhist traditions, for example, there are Buddhist traditions from Tibet, from China, from Sri Lanka, Cambodia and Thailand and such other countries. And so out of all the different cultures that have Buddhism, Dharmasagar is focused on translating texts from Tibetan Buddhism, or Buddhism as it has been transmitted through Tibet. And so you have chosen to become translators in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and from my part I want to say that it is a very good choice. It is actually a choice that is the best possible choice, that you can do. There's no way to make any mistake in taking that choice. And the reason I'm saying for that is that until now, if we look at all the different places and cultures and countries where Buddhism has been spread, the Buddhism that comes from Tibet is the absolute supreme form of Buddhism. And I'm not saying it just because I'm attached to my own roots, but I'm saying it because if we look at the Buddhism as it has been transmitted through Tibet, then looking at the words that express, or looking at the scriptures, we see that they have the Tibetan Buddhism contains the three baskets, the sutras, the Abhidharma, and Vinaya. And as for the meaning that has been conveyed through Tibetan Buddhism, it contains both the Sutrayana and the Mantrayanas. And because of that, we can safely say that everywhere in this world, there's only one place where the whole of Buddhism, as complete as it is found in Tibetan tradition, is only found in Tibet, in Tibetan Buddhism. There's no other country or culture that conveys, that still transmits Buddhism in its full extent as we find in Tibetan Buddhism. And because of that, wanting to become translators in Tibetan tradition is in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is a choice in which there's no way for you to make any mistake.
That call Tadon Tonda Mabu Shia do de Tenechina for the Traveling in Nala, Ile, and then taking a young Dima to so young Dila. As a certain Jiman from the Coast of Patisha Chojere, Tadi Toms is Ashura.
So,
okay, take your time.
And so there are still many things that I could say about what I have just said right now, but maybe some of these things are going to come up in the question that you will maybe have, or we could also talk about this more in depth in the next session that we will have together.
Then that don't say Niba the car chayorsana. That don't say Niba the Lotsawas, Cheta Dembachi, kind of chago race, right? Then Lotsawas Cheta Dembachi Chag Cheta Ane Carle Town, Tendra Kanda Jilla Donle Chigo your race. That day, this Nenga Chimudo Chitomudo. That in the Tambo, then a lot of setting she can't chago race, down the capsule. That pena lots of Jena, Tambo, and it. That's also rangi case and amendo. Pena that should de Inji the Nanga Juguyana, and a Inji cake de la Halibagita, Sanchobati and Yogudu. Then a pena should de French nang la Juguyana, French cake nang la Juguyana, and a French cake de la Halibagi Sanchobatan Chigo, Stantin and Gachi Chagdo, Ross. And then Nenga Niba the car Chagdo Senata, Chuti, and a cake can't just have the Jidita, not a pocket Chadiro. And it in the pocket cake de la, and a Sanchobati Chago, those that can't. Lotsawas Sedi Chagona, Manta Yang, and a Gangni Jusaki Titan, and a Gangla Jusaki Titan. A cake Nila, and a nipper to Sanchova, or Tenachi Yongo dos. That day, Lotsawa said that Demba Chaya Gita, Mangyuki are chucking down to this. That day.
And so now coming to the second subject, the second thing that I wanted to share also is that in order to, the next question that comes is how do I become a qualified translator? How can I know that I have everything that the translator should have, all the qualities that the translation should have? And what is required from me in order for me to become a qualified translator, and corollary to that, on what kind of difficulties, what are the things that I will need to provide efforts and struggle in order to acquire that will enable me to become a qualified translator. So this is important because we're going to have to kind of put some effort into certain things, and so knowing in where we have to put effort is important. So at least that's what I think. And so in order to become a qualified translator, the first thing is, as soon as we talk about translation, then it means that we must know the language towards which we are going to translate. Let's say that we're translating towards English, and then at the very beginning, at the very least, we should be someone who is very knowledgeable both in speaking English and in writing good English. That should be the basis on which we can then build the rest of the qualities or the competencies that a translator should have. And the same goes for if we need to translate into French. So if someone is to become a translator into French language, then that person must have a very good mastery over French language and French writing. The second thing is that the translator must have a complete mastery over the language from which he's translating, so from the original, the source language. And in our case, a translator from Tibetan towards other languages must have a full mastery of both Tibetan language and Tibetan writing or Tibetan literature. And so that is the very basis, that is the very least that we can expect from a translator, to have good, to be fully trained in both the source language and the target language. And so that is the foundation on top of which we can then build the other competencies.
Ane nyenga tang tene pena zamzhong ta tela soba ke ta tsomre yorwa pena nyenga tang zamzhong tang ta dugur ke zorawa kante jita tsomre tene lang ki go do tene teda nyam do kar go do sena tene pena chuluk ke ringne chuluk yemba ke ringne pena ta cherang ki longba ti ta yeshi chuluk la deba jingi pe mangbu yo dewa yana ane cherang yeshi chuluk ki ane mangyi dawa di kaangla kaangsa shi gogo dosi chuluk yenpa ki rini layan ke gogo dosi ta tundu chawa yana ta nangba sanji bi chuluk di ki ta chechu di ta tundong togurwa o te jingi tene yenpa chi par chago dosi na ta ta kei da som tanda lang kebi ki thola ane ta kali jatun ji nangi wad go dos ta loza gi lega chia la ane kado kanda jin che ona ya ane te dang de lane zomba chi tu bin chi ta pen na so da loza gi lega ji danya te ane pamjo gi kebin gi che ta marwa ta ngaso ke ane sanji chulo ge rinni tsa chenpo te ane longba yenba chi da ke yenba chi na la jorni te ge tan roa mi re ta longba te la ane nika tan thato ge ta phende tunju gi samno te cha de yorwa tu chen di kaps ane nika gi chi ta pamjo gi khepin tandala mata ne ane ta nga chi ta kangal tang tana nidang kanta je tse ona ya ta nga ge misi di ta sanji chulo ke Lotsawas chi jeni ta chomba chi ge yinda samni ge ta miyo ta poksam chi zong chi ane Lotsa chi guya di temisi pi kachin bo res ta tema do shin ane 다 직방조기 개변자보다 내가 그게 내가 좀 지체도 아니 로사와 지금이라나 다티 당본이 상담한다 노송화래 아니 때 로사와 지든지 차가 말이스 근데 가시 방조기 개변자고 지 상담도 요즘 말에 땅에 땅을 로사와 킬로조 지요나 다티 지란 남가 노레스 다티리 지란 총자와도나 다티리 방조 개변야와 요레스
And then the other thing that we need on the basis of having a good mastery of both languages and both culture is that we must be fully knowledgeable about composition, about how to compose into our own languages. So we must know poetry, we must know the art of composing books, and we must know also theater or art play and these kind of things. And so we must be someone who has a good knowledge and good understanding, mastery over these aspects of our mother tongue and culture. And on top of that, we must also have good knowledge about the religious background of the place for where the people for whom we are going to translate are used to. Let's say that we are translating for people who live in a center in a country where Christianity is more developed, so people have more faith and are more easily Christian in that country. Then in order for us to be effective as a translator, we must have a good idea of what Christianity is and what are the ideas that are prevailing in the place where our readers are, where the people who are going to read our translations are. And so knowing what Christianity is, knowing their religion, will enable us to make it clear through our translations, or use this translation to make clear the differences between Buddhism and this other religion. And that is going to help to pass on the message that we want our readers to understand. And then the second thing, also another additional thing that a translator should have, is the capacity to put the necessary efforts into becoming a translator, because this is not something that is easy. We all know that how difficult it is to train as a translator and to be effective as a translator and to be able to produce good quality translations. So of course we all know that is something for which we must be able to provide the necessary efforts. And on top of that, we all know that as translators who want to translate Buddhism, we're not doing it because we want to get rich. We're not becoming Buddhist translators hoping to gain wealth through it. We're wanting to become translators because we want to help people, and we want to be able, through our translation, to help people who are going to practice Buddhism, and then through their practice of Buddhism to allow them to get the benefits of practicing Buddhism in this life, and then slowly to get better, to acquire more qualities, realization, and then become Buddhas by themselves. And so that is our goal, the reason for which we want to become translators of Buddhism. And so we also, I think, should have the resolve to want to translate, to become translators, not only for a short period of time, but from now until the end of our life. And so once we have that resolve, then I think that we have what is required to become a good translator. And of course, if we want to become translators just temporarily for a few years or something like that, or if we want to become translators because we think that it's going to make us rich or something like that, or to provide us with a lot of wealth, then I feel obliged to say that this is, if you have motivation like that, then you're mistaken right from the start. So it's better not to start right now. Because if your goal is to become rich or to acquire wealth, then doing business is much more effective than trying to become a Buddhist translator.
Tata Pogi Ki Nana Yu Deva Gita Kanjur Put Jahlat Jitan, and then Danger Pot and Nija Latati. Don't be Gita, Kata Danger Pot, Sunja Latati over it. Tadenda which is the chat on Bayina, Ani Turap Trubani, good son ni, Ani Turam Yeshupa Pata, Wogin Lotsawa, Ani Jakam Mambugi, Kawachi the Sit, Ani Kumbatan the Lene, Georgia Batan the Chadi. That tea nani a pena that Lotsawa Sedin, Zidia pena Loza and Berutananda, which is a Chajawayana, Ani Jagala Penny, the low mambola Jagala Lojona and Joke. The net Jagala Lojona and Judicab certain Kangal Kasi, Yami Tinzo, and Losawa Korangita, Lojugi, Nantrella, and Jena Chinzo Hako race. Then Tika Lotsawa Korang, Lotsawa and Berutana Korangiti, Ruba. Gioba te and Loza Lapside Gila, Kate and the Lapside Gila and Jagiti Chombemba, Jabatan of the Sand or what's in the Langwani. O Tenda Wata, Stotan Duni, and a Jala Penny, and a Dagita, Sanskrit Tiadan, and a Chudareme, Tenda Janet and the Chili race. Then a Penasons and Gambo with the Galda with the Chajawayana, and a Loza Thomas Hambutra. Lotsawa Tambu Chavore, Sandy Lotsawa Tambu Chavore. Konda Jagala, Napicas Yanayan, and a Konda Nyam de Poke, Tiba Jonathan, Muchiduk Tang your ace, Lawyer, Lojukan. Then a Muchiduk and Nani, and a Mitchong at the Tronje, Mitchong at the Troni, and the Lotsawa, Thomas Hambu, the Kibu, Lanik Lavik, or the Chili. Tenetini Pena Lotsawa and Jinsamunda, which is a Chajawayana, and a Kashi Yolo Timani down, and a Daga or you La Timani, and a Tima Mambo and la Pap Tenuje. Tenetini Molozawa loading Shirabdawayana, and a Daga Napayo, the Kaji and Tima Mambo Pan, maybe the Gablish, you Jamni Lotsawa and the Charawa. Tenepena Lotsawa Tadonde Maba Lotsawa. The Maba Lotsawa Jala Pesagita, Lamix and Amanduka, the Namda Tinsul Zina, and the Lotsawa Tinsulita, Kalika Sik Jadu, and the teachings of the Sibu Shingres. Tangatsuki, Lotsawa Lojon Chidi Cubs, and a Pogin Lojugan Nange, and a Lotsawa, Sita Demba, Misova Tinsuki, and a Namtala Lojon Chiba, the famous education for the S. And it's issue.
And so in Tibetan language, as far as Tibetan texts are concerned, we have the 100 volumes of the Kangyur, we have the 200 volumes of the Tengyur, which altogether makes about 300 volumes that are available. And so this literature, the Buddhist literature in Tibetan language, that is kind of exemplified the best by these two collections and these 300 volumes. They have been translated from the 6th century onwards until the 20th century. And so looking at the many generations of Tibetan translators who came and who worked on translating Buddhism to Tibetan, then we see how much difficulty, how much hardship they went through, and how much they were able to accept in order to do translations and in order to train themselves and to study, etc. And so out of all these translators from all these centuries, one that is known to be really qualified and really an example of how a translator should be is Berotsana. And so Berotsana, he went to India in order to learn Sanskrit, to learn the language, and he spent many years in India just to learn the language and to learn how the language written and spoken. And so you can see the hardship that he went through when he was training the language in the biography that he has written, or that is written about him. And once he has finished training the Indian language, so once he mastered Sanskrit language, both spoken and written, then he he started learning about the text about Buddhism, and at times had to risk his own life in order to train, to study, and then to go back to Tibet, because they were not allowed to go back to Tibet. And so during his activity as a translator, then he accepted a lot of hardships and risks, even risking his own life in order to work as a translator. And then at the time of Sonten Khenpo, we had the first translator that appeared, who was Tomi Samboda. He's said to be the first Tibetan translator in history. And so in his life story, we see that 16 young boys were sent to India to become translators. And out of the 16, 15 died on the way or in India. And he was the only one who was able to fully train and come back to Tibet successfully. And so here we see again how difficult it was and how much hardship he had to put in becoming a translator. And then we can also look at the life of Lotsawas Rinchen Zambo. He had to go to Kashmir 2 times. He went to the main to the mainland, as we say it in Tibetan, so it means in India. He went there 2 times as well, and so he went many times in India in order to train and to receive teachings, etc. And so thereby going through a lot of hardships. If we look also at the life of Ngo Lodenshira, and then he also went many times in India and in other countries, and we see in his life story how many hardships he had to go through in order to bring all the teachings and the text to Tibet and translate them. And we can also look at the life of the translator Marpa Lotsawa, and we can see in the manual of his traveling manual, or we can also see in his life story how many hardships he had to go through in order to train as a translator, receive teachings, come back to Tibet, etc. And so this is something that we can all see by looking at the stories of the translators of the past. And I think as translators who, as new translator or a translator in the becoming, I think it is really good for us to also look at, it is really important for us to look at the stories of the past translators.
Then Lotsawas Rinchen Zambo the Kashmiri la Thima Nipa le Pipi Caps de Bogita Zembo Narigi Zembo Lama Yishu get ne Konda Nyamdo Tangune Lotsa Lankan de la Unga Tangore. That Tinani Konzo Mi Niemado. 아니 정성을 되시기도 한. 다 대저 오페나 다 보게티 다 산지 출로데 볼라 만든 지역의 제도는 로자 최종 진이 아빠야 다 갈리페 망보자요리다 미게 소당 되네 주 다세 때 망본도 손도는 되지요레 스타텐조 지라 나서 갈레 소라나야 정년부터 말시야요 갈리시에고스.
And so if we look also, we think about the second time that the translator Rinchen Zambo went to Kashmir, he was there and he met the king of the region of Ngari, who was called Lama Yeshewe, and he decided that he wanted to send 5 boys in order to get trained as translators together with him, who was going to India and to Kashmir, sorry. And so out of these 5 boys, only 2 survived and came back to Tibet and became translators. So if we look at the history of translators and the history of Tibet and how the history of how translation was done, we'll see that there's so many hardships that were gone through, and people risked their life or even gave their lives in order to become translators, and then a great amount of wealth also and resources were spent on training and becoming translators. And so in the future sessions that we'll have together, I have a lot of very nice stories about that I can share with you.
다 되지지. 다 니바 den상 가르쳐도 세나 다 제단 로자와 리가티 다 이ጆ라나만도 계ጆ라나만도 간테다 저렇게 칠레게 로자 리가 지러와. 다 칠레게 나니양 양 칠레지고 칠레지고에 되면서 개침보래 샤스. 페나 다다 나서 다 보기 아니 로자와 로지라 심조치는 스메기 티바이나 로자와 템속에 낭나 아니 산지 출로게 낭니 용자라파 단달라 칠리지는 로자와 지딩이 된다 빼망부지래 샤스 다땡이 빼미스피케 지금 동서 데이터스 내대지는 शुरु지아 빼차자와이나 보고 로자와게 낭니 다 최선 딥싱이 두고 있다 로자와 게다 체시지기 로자와 되게 베로잖아 참 베로잖아도 얘는 다 코랑기 추조져야 돼 할레비 마보래 추마보 조요래 얘는 다 코랑기 첼레 쪼라고 추디 가르 조도세나 상화디 조샤 상화게 나니 다쪼 가르 조도세나 다 상화라 마보여와 자주다 조주다 남조주다 남조라나 미비기 주라네 주탄데 지지 안에 남조 라나 미비기 주텐소 나라양테네 마아나 아트 죽칭기 코르트다 마부도 다텐데 나니다 코랑게 상화게 나니야 코랑게 다 칠리토 티네지아테 도스파타온데 갑스 तने ठीक बात में जी यहाँ से ता आद लग गया थी ता कर से थी ना तो जोखिम शुरू हुई ना नमजे और जोखिम की थी चु तने पे मांग बुझो युवा ता ता ना तो थी ता तेज़ो कंजूर नंगा ता तो युग युमारे मांग छेवा थी ता थी निम्न जुम्बम लाने ता सोला पौधे जिब्जो लाज जीवा और ठीक ना लगे रे कुछ जीवन दी कास लोसावा थी कर से बेरो तना लोगे ना 아니 또 하 줘야 돼 칠레나 다 나네 양 근데 남절라네 미비 주 근데 줘야게 칠레나 잡아 근데 저래샤스 다티 템방 하다게 갑도 오지래 네 템바 쓰들게 갑도 오지래 차자와이나 아니 로자와는 진 상보네 다 로자와는 진 상보 콜 니신 주티 온디 갑스 다 공게 줘야티 아니 도데당 tanda joyore ane zori pata me soari pa tanda joyote ena yang ane khorang ki ta jornang la tu pa shimju chene ta dom da ja on the cups ane dong ha ni na ni ane nga de zo chele chine jorshas o de je tene ngolo ta wa lodin sirap 다 템바 서들게 뒤게 다 로자와 게다 첨부지게 다 콩도 지를 차서 봐야나 다 콩게 안동아 니가 조요를 때에는 양 나지로 빼뇨뇨래 다 망체와 된도 셀레지는 조요 바래 단도게 나네 양소 가르치레지는 조요르스나 안에 셰챙기 거데 안에 또 셀레지는 조샤 어때 근데 디지라 다다디 조지 빠데 아드샤기다 계준 제디기 안에 낙소로자와 콘도지를 차송바이나 안에 오마랑라 칠레지는 조제 같은 저래샤 오마기 좀
뭐봐
오마
무슨
오마랑 오마 근데 테니 다 빠섭로자와 니마타 로타와 니마타한다고 지를 차송바이나 제단 오마기 좀 망보 조요래 아니 디나네야 오마게 나네야 오마 탄주르와 다 오마라 오마랑 지바다 탄주르와 니와 o te na ne oma rangji oma thanjor wa te la ane chele nangji te jor te wa tan de rendo tene chedang shewa yana ane phoge ta chanta den go loji na na pata wa yana ane oma thanjor te ane apa sab lo sa wa nyima cha ke ane jowani zong de ta polo wani ban ro tan cha di do ye da de jing de ga ta ma ba la che na ba lo ta lo jong jing de ga se tene chedang 다 남바 산제파고 주론 동안이가라 장네 시고래 되네 된 나네야 그나 소소게 다 님들 첼레지네 장게 님들 첼레지네 요인 베나 나도에나 단 도와 첼레지네 니로사 티네 요인 니 아니 도데 도하게 나네야 그나 용 페브라 버튼데 지 세네 아니 데라 아 로종지네 jorna 그나 페미시비 야고 차그레 스타테 페케치 못 데데쇼지
Nice. And so this is one thing I wanted to share, and then something else yet is that the work of translators, when we think about it, then it is basically to translate text into another language. But what is really important is that that translators choose a specialty. So not only that they become specialized in translating Buddhism, but within Buddhism also that they specialize in translating a given topic or given theme or given subject. And this is something that in my opinion is really extremely important to have in mind, and to have this idea that I want to become a translator who will do translator on this subject, this theme and this thing. And so I think that it is really important to focus on something as specific as possible, and say, for example, I want to be specialized later on when I will be translating. I want to be specialized in translating this theme, and especially the literature around this work or this special text itself. And so this, I really want to emphasize on that, and I think it's really important. And this is based on what I saw in my research when I was searching Tibetan history about translators, because I saw that most of the translators who were in activity in Tibet had a domain of predilection, or had a specialized text or a subject upon which they were working most of the time. And so, for example, if you look at the translator at the time of the King Trizon Detsen, so one of the best translator at that time was Berotsana. And if we look at everything that Berotsana has translated, of course he has translated an extremely vast amount of text, so there's a lot of things that he translated. But out of all of the translation work that he did, what stands out is the translations on Mantrayana, on Vajrayana. So this seems to be his specialized domain. And yes, and so of course within Mantrayana there are many different subjects, many different areas that can be focused more even. And because, for example, you have the Kriya Tantra, you have the Upa Tantra, you have the Yoga Tantra, then you have the Anuttara Tantras. And out of the Anuttara Tantras, which is the general categorization of the Ansopas Tantras, then you can have also the Mahayoga, Anu Yoga, and Ati Yoga, which is commonly referred to as Dzogchen. And so, as for Berotsana, his specialization within the Mantrayana was in the peak of all the vehicles, which is Ati, or we can say also Dzogchen. And there's most of his translations are done on a text about Ati Yoga. And of course, so he has mostly translated about Dzogchen, and so most of his translations are not found within the Kangyur, but they are found within a collection that is called Nyuma Gyubum, so the compendium of old tantras, of ancient tantras, and or tantras of the ancient tradition, you know. And so this way we see that Berotsana chose a specialization as a translator, which was Mantrayana, and within the Mantrayana he was specialized in translating Anuttara Tantra specifically. And so that was for just an example from the first kind of the first translation period, the ancient translation period. And as for the new translation period, or Chidar, as we say, then if we look at Rinchen Zambo, who is one of the most prominent translators of that later period. And then when I was making my research on Rinchen Zambo particularly, I found out that he has translated about a lot of subjects, like from sutras. He translated also about how do you say crafts, craft, and generally speaking. He has also translated about medicine. And even though there are translations about a lot of different subjects that is found within his work, most of the time he was, if we kind of sum up all the translations he produced and kind of see to which category they belong to, then we see that he has translated, of course, both on Sutrayana and Tantrayana and Mantrayana, but most of his translations are related to Mantrayana. And so mainly he seemed to have been a translator who focused on Mantrayana texts. And now going to Lotsawas, which was another of the very well-known translators of the second period of translation, he has translated very little about Mantrayana. And he mainly focused on sutras, and within the different themes or subjects in the Sutrayana, he has focused on Prajnaparamita. And now to take another translator who was Nakso Lotsawas, the translator who was in activity and translated for Atisha, for Lord Atisha, and then he seemed to have been focused mainly on Madhyamika. And another translator also who stood out for his choice was Patsap Lotsawas Nimadrap, and he mainly focused on Madhyamika. And out of the two kinds of Madhyamika that there are, so we have Svatantrika Madhyamika and Prasangika Madhyamika, he seemed to have focused on Prasangika Madhyamika. So he decided he would specialize himself only on Prasangika Madhyamika texts. And looking at the history of the Buddhist teachings and how the different subjects of Buddhism became well known, we can see that Prasangika Madhyamika became prominent in the Tibetan Buddhism only when Patsap Lotsawas actually translated these texts from the Prasangika Madhyamika tradition. And so I think that it is also very important that you who are intending on to become translators of Tibetan Buddhism in your own languages, I think it's really important that you choose a subject, an area, a kind of a domain, and that you say right from now and say, okay, I'm going to, in my career, I will be focusing on texts that belong to this part, and so that you right from now that you choose a sub-specialization, not only become a translator of Tibetan Buddhism, but also choose a sub-specialization and go as detailed as possible in what you intend to be translating. That's all.
One reason.
This one.
당아도 되죠. 뭐뭐도스. 네. 당아 다 동생 숨바디 가르치야 요새나 다 데이터워치 토니 다 로자와 체다 된바시 차차기 지수 당아 종의스 다 주디 요거와 안데 요런디 값다 로자와도 이나 로자와 코란 기고 용미 아니 코란기치 다 칭도 당 데솔라텐 드네 코란 랑기치 삼노 당나 고아칸 라과 데이터 마조야게 탑지체니 요메데바체 아니 로자와다 냠드 아니 나타 보기 산지 추로란 키비기 드네 키바 다 펜드타세나 디기도 아니 페나 켄보 타 근데 깁시 믹스기타 첼레바 된다 단냠도 네 송제진이 jorgo야데 뱀미시비케 쳔보레샤스 ताते नागे ताम से शुरू हमारे ता नागे ते लोचावा किता लोजिला दोस्ता छेले शिंजू चिगी योरवा ता तुने चेउंडे पेना कांजुर ता तेंजुर तेंजू की अने जुरजांग के नाला ngaso ba ta on di kaps तुने यों कांडे चेना छांगमा अने जागर जी पेंद्र तके का मी अने पोज लोचावा तो 송드르진에 로펜 송드르진에 조르자와데 제노마도 로사와 치고도 조르자와데 다 페뇽뇽레스 페뇽뇽 페뇽뇽레스 그런데 가서 로펜 송드르기진에 조르고야데 페미시리케 침보겐도스 티치치 그는 이바데 다 로사와 코랑게 나랑라 양다 로사와 기타 점박하시 여러와 पेना छेंपुक लोचावा लाया था लोचावा ले तांबो बातिन सुरे रंबा मावा थे तेने तेनी पार्जी च लोचावा लाया थी ता लोचावा चीनी ओ द छिंबा ता निरम थिंबो दा होते तेने शुचिंग का लोचावा लाया थी ता लोचावा थांची के नानी ता छुदु चुबा याक्षुदी छावयोरवा ओ लोचावा कोरान लाया रंबा समियोरे 다 तुने चेउंदे काब्स जोर युंदे 아니 로차와 치키고 치네 जोर 마데와치 로차와 망보 송드르 치네 줘야 돼 개치모도 그봐 아니 테다 냠도 페나 용다 페나 곰반조 저오지 용지 조르요나 담보 치 조르 그봐 야 데니티 로차와 딜이 야와치 기타네 딜은 주주치 야 로차와 딜이 야와치 당 안에 펜데다 진다 냠도 코르더 치네 안에 양체 슈다치 당아주 슈친 라디 여러와 슈다치 든지 치네 페나 용기 연아야 네 레망볼라 조르 레망볼라 조르 means 다 양의 양도 다 주주지야 다 안에 슈첸지야 돼 페미시리케 팀도스 답에 찾아와이나 힘들어와 네 데레다 나서 간조게 나라다 제동바요 와 제동반다고 찬송바이나 제동바데 담보 저라티 템방하더 보템부 투걸 저자바스네 다 임바 연아양 안에 템바 서더 가즈페나 로자와른 진zam부라고 질 차송바이나 제동발라 주주 다슈친 팀만이 나고 조지 빠딘 아드샤다 냠도 슈신 나한테 제샤 주주의 슈신 나샤 तेने देगे जेला यांचेर दे गमतो ब जाविन जोनी ता जो जी पादिन आद जन्याम तो अने जेदों पाला देशे नां जे जेदों ब सीगी ल या जुजु दा शुचे तंदा थिमा सोम जी नां थिमा सोमिन जीन जी नां तेने तेने ngolo za lo den shirab jawo je le changpo ma yana khong yang yang te len juju दा शुचे तंदा नां सा ता तंदु जे on जेदों ब जीगु jawo je le cha somba yana ना फाचेर जुजिजिया ती थिमा जे नी क्युनी के पादरो रे तांगा तर सिबु ठिंग नि जेली मामा ओ तंदि नांदो ताते ना ताते जेदों बता पेंसन दो जे ता तेले जेबा ता तोज फा शब सबु जिने सिंजु चेवा येना ने छुजो मांबु तिला यान यान दन जुजु चेने शिचिन चेवा जे देवा इबा ते पेसे बोरेसा तुरि चेउंदि का संगासो अने कि जोर जा जावा माई बचे 아니 양스 주주 지고야 다 양스 때는 기바 어세다 덴바 탄달라 돈이 고들 제니 또 스템바 지고야 때 페미시리케 쳔모도
And then the second thing that I wanted to also to share is that once one has become a qualified translator, and then one is actually translating, and then when we reach that point in time, then I think that it's really important that we do not stay on our own and do our translations just by relying on dictionaries in order to understand the meaning, and just relying on our own understanding and our own ideas in order to do the translation work itself. And I think that together with the translators, it is extremely important that we take the support of Panditas, of people who are very knowledgeable about the subject that we're translating. So the people who are knowledgeable about Tibetan Buddhism in general, we can call them Panditas, or the equivalent of Panditas. They would be Khenpos or Geshes, and it is extremely important that translators work in collaboration or in tandem with such scholars like Khenpos and Geshes. It's really extremely important. And this is not something that I'm telling you just out of my mind. It's not just something that an idea that came up with like that from one day to the other, just like that. But I am supposed to be someone who is making a full research and a PhD on how translation work was done along the Tibetan history. And so when we look at the Tibetan history, it is very obvious that, like for example, when we look at all the colophons of translations that are included inside the Kangyur, for example, and when we read those colophons, it is always stating this Pandita together with this translator has done this translation, and then afterwards there came this other translator and this other Pandita who revised and improved and corrected the translation. And so we can see that in most, a vast majority of the translations found in the Kangyur, it is always done by in collaboration with the Pandita. And it is extremely rare to find a translation that is done by a single translator on his own. It does occur, but it is extremely rare. And so that is something that I wanted to share. And then the next thing is that so there are many different steps, or many translators can have many different kinds of qualification. Historically speaking, there was 3 types of translators. The first one was the translators of the small notes, Chenpo Lotsawas, and so they were considered to be the beginner translators, although it was the lowest level of translators that you could have. You were working with small chunks of text and trying to understand small amounts of words at a time, and then trying to render them into Tibetan, not taking full sentences or full paragraphs. And then the second type of translator was the intermediate corrector or intermediate reviser, who was a translator who had some experience. His experience was not the highest, but he had already some experience and could do some translation by his own. And then you had the highest level of translator, who was the translator, a reviser, or the great reviser, the Shuchengi Lotsawa. And that was the best translators who had access to this role, and who were actually going to revise translators done by other pairs of translators and Panditas. And so these were the 3 different levels of translators that historically were we find in Tibetan history. And so it was very rare, and we could say it was never the case that one translator on his own was going to publish or to produce a translation of a text. There was always a Pandita or a scholar that was involved in the translation work. And so, for example, let's say that a translator wanted to translate a work such as the Abhidharmakosha. So he would do first one translation together with a Pandita, and then he would then show his translator to another translator who had more experience than him. They would talk about it and improve things already. And then once that second round was done, then he would go to a Pandita and to one of the Shucheng Lotsawa, of the highest of the more experienced translators, and they would go again through all the text and check everything, revise everything from beginning into the end. And so they would improve, correct, and revise all the translation work that has been done. And the fact that the translation was seen as a process that is iterative, that a translation had to go through many times revisions and corrections and retranslations and improvements, etc. So this was completely normal, and this is the majority of the translation work that we can see in Tibetan had gone through many steps and many times of revisions, improvements, retranslations, etc. We can take one example. For example, the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 verses in Kyetongpa. So first it has, if we look at the first time that this Prajnaparamita in 8,000 verses was translated, it was done during the first period of translation, during the time of the king Trisundesen, during the monarchical period, and but at the second period of translation, we saw that Lotsawa Rinchen Sampo took again that translation from the first period, and he corrected it and revised it many times, at least 2 times. And so the first time he did together with Atisha, so he took that translation and revised it and improved it and made sure that the translation was as good as it could be. And then at a later time, and then it seems that Dromton Bhagavajone was receiving teachings on the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 verses from Atisha, and during the time that they were receiving explanations from him, they took that opportunity in order to correct, to improve, to revise the translation that had already been revised by Lotsawa Rinchen Sampo and was translated already from before. And it seems that at the time when Dromton Bhagavajone was receiving these teachings, then at least 3 or 4 different extra revision processes were gone through. So I'm not really sure how many were done, but at least 3 or 4 were gone through. And then so it didn't stop at only Lotsawa Rinchen Sampo, but again afterwards, Ngawang Lotsawa, he again made one round of revision together with another Pandita, and he improved and revised the translation once again. And so we can see that even on one work like the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 verses, then the process of translation and the times, the amount of times it was improved, revised, and retranslated, etc., is quite important. And so this is just one example of one text that I took out from all the translations that were produced, but for most of the translations, then there is a similar thing that can be found if we bother to look at the life stories of the translators, what work they translated, etc. So we can see that the process of the translation was absolutely not an endeavor that was done by one single individual on his own translating. It was a teamwork over many different translators, many different Panditas, and many generations. And so I think again that this is something that is extremely important for you to keep in mind, that when you will be translating, you will never be doing it on your own, just with yourself and what you know. I think this is really important to keep in mind.
tene pena tada ki chalata poge ke nan jor dewa ke ta naba sanji bi chulu tenso ta tensa shimjo chen ke tenso ke ta jor han sanya ke ta pu ta po cheda demba yabu shiwi cha shala de de jimsen chik de thori dwa pena poge nan jor dewa ki chonjo tenso tensa yangche pa kondu sanskrit na pa ju yore ane sanskrit ki jong tanda ra dewa cha ma sang wa tenso ane poge na jor jawa te ki su jong kha kong tu chi yore tu che on di ka so sanskrit len ki pa tenso ko la on di ta pe de poge na ni su jong di ka so ne pe de chu la chu ya pa na yin pe de ko ha li ba ki ya wo cha do se da den ba cha do kondu ko song de ya da jim se ne ga tanda si thu in sa res te de jo jo.
And if you look at what is being done right now and nowadays, the lengthy process of revisions, etc., is the main reason, I think, for the quality that today's researchers, whether in the academic context or not, kind of see in the translation that were done in the past in Tibet. And they see that they all are amazed by the quality that was achieved by translators in Tibet. And I think what is responsible for this quality is the way that they approach translation and the way that they actually did it by many revisions, etc. And so up to a point that nowadays a Sanskrit version of the Bodhisattva is actually being retranslated from Tibetan into Sanskrit. And whenever there are texts that are for which some parts have been lost in the original Sanskrit, then researchers and scholars are retranslating into Sanskrit from the Tibetan translations. And when they do so, those who are involved in the translations from Tibetan to Sanskrit, they say that it looks like when you translate from Tibetan to Sanskrit, it seems that the meaning and everything is so well maintained that it looks like you're doing nothing more than putting water into water, that there's nothing that is missing, nothing that is lost at all. And so they also say that when they want to translate back from Chinese into Sanskrit, then things do not go as smoothly.
Chubani zone data ta pots in bitira la na tikido kambe ta longo nidja pots in bugu tikap da wena ta longo nidja tsama jo yoro wachi ta tegi tikap la ane pojit sembo tenso ta tene jaro ji pende ta tenso ta tene poj Lotsawas tenso ki ane kunzu karen nandu sena kunzu dachi saba tanda mambu shiuji tembak jesha te kachin buchi redo pena sondrin gambu uti kapsu ane sanji chulo di pola tangbo taware tundu chiyon di kapsu ane sanji chulo ki pena ta sanji da chu da genden la soba konjo ku samu tsen den soya ta tani saba zogu urwa tundu chiyon di kapsu ane dachi saba mambu shiuji tembak jesha ane te da nyam de pena tene ta dan cheson design ki tuga la tene zeda tukze chenbo la ya te ta te kar resena te re ta da yong din je ya yore kanjo nang la te ta sanskrit ta ane poge ni ki ta chingzo da wo ji chaw yore o tanda chingzo tanda ji zui nang sha ane tene chudi songzen senalan yinyon tene kongi tuygaw la da pena tiso di tere durab 조비바 말 드럽제바 드럽제바래 드럽고바래 또 드럽고바 나나 페나 솔로 제자 로텔라트네 잡저 방보 니발라야 다데 남제데 제바 토진 рем보엔 라고래 잡저 방보 니바엔 라고래 강데타 보기 아니 로자와 텐수기 아니 추 간디스 교고 요미키 아니 로자와기 tane loza ripiki yonglo tanda ki temple zinu yore tene pena loza wa thom sambu ta ki tigala ane kejes tambu de chebarwa tene thosong desing ki tigabsa ane keji ni ba de chebarwa tene thodi songsing ki tigabsa keji sumba che kande keji zamba somchi tene nang yore tene ke satin da wajile cha somba yana ta thom samba de tra ki tigala ke satin nang yore thosong desing ki tigala ke satin nang yore tene thodi songsing ki tigala ke satin nang yore tene temba sada ki tigala sta tene loza warangen sambo ni tene ngolo kalse shala loza wa ke pala ta keji thamanda wo cha yorwa o kande ta tiso ti ge rain la ane chulo ge thani saba zoya ta ane sanskrit ta ane boge ni ke minzo diya chungzo diya tene loza ribi gi yong yonglo tanda sa som na ya diya tene keji che ya ta kichi la ya ta sembo ki kichi ge yor ta sembo ki ka ge pham ta maung pala ane pena dache saba zogona ta te meriri ge zom chos ane lotawa ta penda ta chaman zonsa la zogos pena thani saba di zogo na lotawa ge tangbo thani de la korang ge samso di tonggo yore ta thani de sanskrit ge thani de poge de tenda ji jonan de re la na korang ge samso di tong ताते कार चेगो उसने थामा देला अनि लोचावा द पेंडे तने मांबोन जोम द चुजिन का साला है तेला टेम्पर थिन ओ ता तानी जोम ते सांसिक कर के मेन ते माउ पाला फोकेन त ची इंदा तिनु चिने टेम्पर ची दो तिने टेम मातो लोचावा सोजो के अनि सोला दाजे साबा न चुनि जोम मछो से छन ते जी और ता टेम्पो के को ओ तेल की लाओ ता के साचे लाया दी कर छा और सिना ता तुरब रंबा गने दिए उन काल साने भोगे के तेला काले जोवा दो योरवा अंतने जोवा दो उन का दा निंग बा को का वातिन सो काले फा तोरने अनि दास्ता पा ता को देवा ता लापर त ये दिन सो या अनि देर तांग ने जोयाते के सरती लाव योरे की ता के सरती नितेस छेप्र योरे o ta tenju ramba mamu shiu chin re sha ta tenzo pe misiri pe chin do ta nganso de chuji jamso gi ta loza ge lobda da uchil cha somba yana ta poke ge loza wa lobda ti cha yundi kaps ani pogi ta ngoma loza wa ge loji tenso lak da ani chu jordan ta tane ke temple che da da che saba zoda tenso lo lobjon cheni ani tenso ni lecha lengo ya ti pe misiri pe chin bo re sha 다 진소 된소로 럽종 제고나 안에 제다 또즈 쳔보다 아니 제다 또즈 림보 잡죠 방보 니발라야 돼다 된소는 니버도 진소기 따고 된소로 럽종 제고
के सरचे तंग अनि शंबचिला तनी केबरते जियस सोमदिनी यागो गोमासो
किची लाया ता जाबो का
अले वन केचे तंग के सरचे ओनासस
किची द के सरचे
नस
किची लाया थे जाबो चे में ना युंगे हमारे
नस
के सरचे लाया थे लोता वाला पेंट तक जो चे छो योरे
And so the last thing that I wanted to share with you is that looking at the history, so in Tibet, during the 6th century onwards, then translation work has begun. And we can say that during this, about 200 years that went from there until from the 6th until the 8th century, so during these 200 words, a lot of translation work was done. And so we usually call this period the Tibetan, the Tibetan monarchical period, or the time of where there was a monarch in Tibet. And so during these 200 years, a lot of the translation work was done. And at that time, then there were the kings of Tibet that gathered. There were the Panditas who also gathered. There were the translators who also were involved. And all of them then gathered in order to decide what was going to be translated how. So they decided which word or which expression was going to be translated in what way. And they kind of established some rules and some guidelines about how to translate what, and what should be done, what can be done, what cannot be done. And so, for example, going at the very beginning, at the time of Khenpo, when there was no Tibetan translations about Buddhism. Buddhism was virtually unknown to Tibet at that time. Then everything had to be decided from scratch. They had to decide how to translate the three jewels, how to translate the Buddha, how to translate the Dharma, how to translate Sangha, etc. So for all of these new words and concepts, there had to be new translations and new words in Tibetan. So they had to create these equivalents at that time. So this was one period of a lot of new words and a lot of new terminology that was created. And then later, at the time of Trisong Detsen, then there's this work, the Jiratori Chemo, or the Mahavyutpati, that some of you must be familiar with. It is a text that can be found within the Kangyur. And so it is some sort of lexicon or dictionary. It's actually kind of a compilation of passages in Sanskrit and their equivalents in Tibetan. And so then this work was created in order to help and to unify the work of the translators. And then at a later period, even after that, at the time of Chide Sonzen or Senalek, which is after that, it is about at the 9th century. So in the years 800 something. And so at that time, another work, which is the second Trajor Bambu Nipa. So it is the twofold, yes, it is Mahavyutpati, basically, which was, or no, it was another one. I don't remember the translation right now, but Trajor Bambu Nipa was composed at that time, and it is also long.
Dajur Bambu Nipa the Lotsa Ripi Yunglo.
Lotsa Ripi
Lotsa Ripi Yunglo, Tatinang the Lotsawas in Tupiane, Chukandis Yogo. Pena pay shops have you. Tatina la pena Jutap pena Kerang Sojana Jayatan, the Ne Tanki de Jayatan, Tonjur Jayatan, Ane pena Kong only Jayachura. Tatita Jutap into Kanda Pijutangome, Kanda Tati Lota Ripi Jungo, thing about the Tower, the picket.
And so this text, Trajor Bambu Nipa, it is also called the middle or the medium Mahavyutpati, and it contains all the art of translation. It is a description of the art of translation, in that it says what are the contexts where you're allowed or you should leave the Sanskrit words as they are, at what context you should do literal translation, at what other context you should be doing a translation of the meaning and not keep it only at translating the words. It also tells you when you can and when you should translate by inverting the elements within a sentence or within a paragraph, and all these things is very precisely described into this text. And so I think that as translators, it is something that you should definitely study. And so, yes, so it is at that time, during the 9th century, that this treatise about the art of translation was composed. And so at the time of, so summing up, at the time of Sonten Gampo, together with Sambota, there was the first period of development of the terminology of the terms that were going to be used. This was the first moment where new words were created or new terminology was created. And then the second time where a modification to that was brought is during the time of the King Tsultrim. And at that time, there was new words that were introduced, and the previous translations were also amended or improved. And then there was also, so this was the second time that something was done for the art of translation, and then a third time at the time of Tsultrim. And then at that time, and there was a how do you say, a revision of the translations. A revision, it's like yes, like you have, for example, in Spanish and Portuguese at certain moments in time, and then the language is changed. Sorry, actually.
Language reform.
Yes, language reforms, yes. And so there were three language reforms occur. First at the time of Khenpo, and then the second time at Tsultrim, and the third time at Tsultrim, third reform. And then afterwards, in the later period of translation, at the time of Lotsawas, for example, he also introduced new words, revised things, and reformed a little bit the language also. And so this second period of translation starts from Lotsawas and ends at the time of Shalu Lotsawa, who was said to be the last translator of that later period of translation. And so during all that time, then new words were introduced, and the work of translators has been just as much. It has been to translate, it has also been to put together, to find new terms for new ideas or new concepts, and to compile dictionaries, glossaries, and to do all this secondary work that goes together with the translation work. And together with that, like I was saying, the kings also had a role in that. They, when at the time of the monarchical epoch, then the king himself decided and made an edict that stated that such words in Sanskrit had necessarily to be translated, needed to be translated in that way in Tibetan. And so it was a rule, a law that was made and had to be followed by any translator who was in activity at the time. So the king himself got involved and made sure that the translations were unified by himself edicting laws. And so this was one way of ensuring the unity of the translations, and the other one was that it was by creating a consensus between the community of translators and Panditas. So it was commonly accepted that when a new word or a new translation needed to be created, it was not allowed that a single translator comes up with an idea and says, okay, I'm going to translate this that way. This was never allowed. But instead of that, what happened is that the initial translator, the one who found or encountered this word in Sanskrit that had no equivalent in Tibetan yet, then kind of came up with an idea of how to translate it, said, okay, I have found this word in this context. And I think that one good way of translating it would be that. And so he presented that to the community. He gathered all the Panditas and the other translators. And they came together in what is called the Chogedunsa, so the great meeting place, the great Dharma meeting place. And there he presented the new word, the Sanskrit, and made a case for his translation. And then afterwards, then all together, the other translators and the scholars would decide whether this was a good choice of vocabulary, of terminology or not, and then they would together decide of how to translate that word into Tibetan. And then from the outcome of that meeting would be that from now on, such word in Sanskrit was going to be translated in such a way in Tibetan, and that was then compiled into glossaries or dictionaries, etc. And so there is a little difference between the edicts of the king that stated that the translation of that word should be done this way, and the consensus that was reached by the community of Panditas and translators. But these two ways were used in order to ensure the unity of translation in the history of Tibetan Buddhism. And so, yes. Yes, and so when as for the reforms, like we have seen, then it is because language had changed, and the words that were used in translation had become archaisms. It was more difficult for Tibetan at later period to understand what was said, and so to make it simpler and to correspond to the actual state of the language, then they made reforms of language and then re-adapted all the translations that were done before that. And so I think that is extremely important for you who are part of this training of translators, that is Dharmasagar, that you study these treatises about the art of translation, and that you consult all the documents and all the material that is available and that was produced in Tibet in regard to the way of and the art of translation itself.
예, 타서
사선.
당가서 도고한테 소 어스마 못어서 드니 카딘조라 좋아트네 요나 좋아트는지 드니 답세브라 토진 징보라나 만도 답죠 방보니바 디콜라양 제제나 가모가서 마음바라케데 징고레 타티나라 티 답죠 방보니바 티다 로자 레비기 용로 차온디 갑스 아니 티나라타 보zen부 그때가서 배나 담비취티 지저온데 제탑 가르가르 페이지 타용에 상막게 시부티요레 드니시온디 가서 나도데 다티소 지마치글라야 답디니 킬랑아서티 돌케데 시난지그레 드네 티지엘라타 치나바 주바요나 주바티니 나나 마레.
And so, yeah, I'm sorry to have taken so much time, much more that was initially planned for this session. And so maybe you can spend some time now if there's any questions. And so just one final note about the Rajur Bambu Nipa, or the middle Mahavyutpati. So it is a treatise about the art or the science of translation. And so within it, it contains all the different techniques and strategies that were devised and used in the past by translators in Tibet. And so I think that it is something that can be addressed on its own. It can be a subject for another session that we can hold together. And so at that time, then we're going to go through more detail about this specific work and what is its content. And so as for now, if you have any questions, then I will be very happy to answer.
근데 칼라사에 기술을 말아. 저것도 되더라고.
Ngawang is worrying that you're missing lunch or dinner.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'm hungry, but it has nothing to do with the time.
저진다다 가와요.
Tanda Portugal yala.
라스미스. 저 도고도자.
Trotos takarina hakum sangate kali jamni sare take journey. It must be because it's kind of tiresome to translate. So I became hungry.
다 콘소시 실란초하게 뒤도 토나더니 나도 참이자고요. 지라 뒤도 찍다 말아베.
So is there anyone who is missing a meal now? So if so, then we can stop it here right now, and then we can you can bring any questions at a later session, or if you have questions right now. I cannot see
ane
anything.
konso de da training zone de yan tenso ge thola chi samno tang tene paro la yan chi jowa jawo da doba da thesam jawo tanda da yan chi koda man thoba ge rik tanda jona ane sola sinti ja ja ro chi sro ane jira nga so de yan ta diri chi de chi zone yan nga so de to jowa chene chi ya tan tanda chi chu res ne tene chinzo ge da tiso mambu ji ta nga ke jala ton nembo ji zame chine nyen son stapen ka se thoya na me machines yena ya ane chinzo la thoji chi shya yins.
And so what I can propose you is to keep thinking about these subjects, keep thinking about the subject that we have talked about, and then whenever you have any note, any idea, any question that arises, please take note of it, and then we can talk about it in a later session. And then we can also make a session specifically about question and answer and just more an exchange. And so I am extremely grateful for you to have listened to me very carefully, and I cannot judge from here how much you have actually understood, but it looks like you were interested and you listened very carefully, so thank you very much for that. And yeah, I hope that we can continue this at a later time and then cover more things.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not that I have a real question right now, because there's a lot of things to think about before coming up with a decent question. But still, I wanted to thank Khenpo, because it's very nice to learn about all the efforts that the past translators have made to make this available to all of us. And it's very inspiring and also helpful to value all these conditions that we now have, that we don't need to travel actually anywhere. We can study from home, and it helps, because it's very easy when you don't have to make all these efforts to think that it's just something common or ordinary, when it's actually not. Many people gave their lives for this, so I think it's important for us as translator aspirants to know all these things, to value what we have. And I wanted to thank also to learn how thorough these translations were made, how much effort was put into the revisions and all of that, and not just publish whatever first thing comes to mind. It's also very inspiring, and because then we are studying something really authentic. So I'm very happy to learn about all this, and very inspiring. So thank you so much, Ola. And thank you for the translator also, because otherwise I don't get a thing.
단다데 캠보라게 되니치 차상 모저나야데 그런 속에 지 끼줄된 속에 강가 가족 잡여매당 때 속에 꼴라 되니치 나서되지 모저나야데 뱀메세 가린 체스 단다버도 되니치 드라랑 사보다지 지 하고에 기 고급 레만선스 정도가 되니 소소라지 당원에 지 메바께당 아니 지 일단 단답 나솔라더니 튕긴 가서 여바된들에 지 린탕제기 제도 되는 뱀메세 개침부 레샤스 김생가스 단답 난속이다 지 소속이 나올라다 기보진 대진했더니 로준 제고 라데 가서더니 남남몰라더니 강가 가서 야여바디 첨바제 줘야 당더니 지다 린탕시라지 여사마레던 지 대한더니 지 레로치 레샤스 근데 삼로기 총라 쇼레데 레로치 레샤스 드네 대지 보면 봐요 남남목이 교리용배 가서 아니 따지 귤 당보지 귤드네 될 남상 왔다 드샤스라네 팔 남상 빠준 조조든지 많이 봐 교리야 당지 귤지야 당 드네 슈첸 당 드네 지 로자와 찍라도 니라도 숨라도 드네 슈첸 테마 망보진지 나야데 가서 제요메디 수수기 한지 하고야 되네 배 개발 첨부 시우 차기도 김생카라서는 수수기한 로존지 데사게 줄데사기 아마디 뱀메세기 뼈닥보다 직 템보yen 바직 대 칼라거타 링탕 수수기 링탕 트레토비기 체도 되네페 개발 첨부직 태용도 쓰더니 다디기 차상되기 게 교를 식바다데 차상기 거라더니 수수기 직 셰야당 자야당 되니 직 고갑 라바디테 뱀메세기 가보였으니 캠보라 가진 치슈기 is
Yeah, common sense le konkawanre.
Where are you from and what is your name?
My name is Nuno, and I'm from Chile. Chile is next to Argentina, so yeah. Actually, it's very nice to have this opportunity because even if I tried without any economical resources, if I tried to go to India to study, it's really not possible because I cannot just walk and then swim to India, you know. So to be able to study this from home is very nice. I really appreciate it, but also I'm aware that if I'm not making that part of the effort, I must put that same amount of effort in the other areas of study and translation. So I make the aspiration also to emulate the efforts that were made in the past, so to be able to facilitate the access to these precious teachings to other who are not as fortunate to be able to be here right now. So
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, ane konla chirange samso sumba tela thuji che ni mixer ge ta kunzo changma la tene ta chenzo ge ane sanji chilo de ta zombo leng longba mangbu ting nang la ta tape tang ne ane mi re ge pendi jo ya ge che ta chuji jamzo ge lobda nang lan zo yu je ne ane loza danya tang tane mixer ge ta 보지 산지 치료때 안에 도스다 게링 잠라 마부팅나 조니 아니 점블링이 토라 아니 다베타와 기타 첼레 된다 딜 쉬어야 되나 페미시디 가보죠 아니 예 타바니 투지 체 쉬어인스 근데 저자로 하마데.
And so now, in order to conclude, I would like to, of course, thank you to have shared your thoughts, and I would like to thank all of you also from the bottom of my heart for having the motivation and inspiration to want to translate the Buddhist teachings that were transmitted through Tibet in many countries all over the world. And in order for that to happen, to have been doing work on that and to have joined this translator training Dharmasagar, and then from there to train and to work as translators, to work on translations. And so for the fact that you have the inspiration of spreading the Buddhist teachings in that way by translation and helping other people to reap the benefits from practicing the Buddha's teachings is something that I value enormously, and so I want really to thank every one of you from the bottom of my heart. And so see you next time.
Angake lami. Koto de. Che.
Lasa, Karinche. Thank you very much, Khenpo.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy your meal.